can't speak so much to what is different about my version than the theatrical version, because I've only ever really analyzed my own version and what I'm trying to do with that version. The theatrical version, to me, it's what it became once I wasn't involved anymore on it. It wasn't like I had created some masterpiece and then the studio came in and said, we're going to take this away and make it not a masterpiece, because it never was a masterpiece. It was never that I was like, I will not change a frame of this film. It was just that I thought what problems it had needed to be addressed in the last minute of the movie.
Mel and Mel's company produced it and sold it to Warner's and Paramount. And I think they were expecting a Lethal Weapon, or what Lethal Weapon had sort of become at the time. A very sort of accessible, kind of mainstream movie. This movie clearly wasn't that.
Oh, God. We gotta go, okay? Come on! Porter! Fuck!
We went back and forth. I think we previewed it 3 times. They definitely wanted to change the ending. I remember having it was sort of an early meeting with Sherry Lansing at Paramount. And it was great. As Brian says, she's talking to Brian. She says, okay, now let me get this straight. Mel doesn't get the money. He doesn't live. And you kill the dog. And Brian says, would you take 2 out of 3? And they didn't want any of that. And I remember having another meeting with Brian, with Bob Daly and Terry Semmel, and it was the same thing. They're like, you killed the dog, for God's sakes. You can't kill the dog. And the sort of vision of what this movie was had sort of kind of changed a bit.
It wasn't a bad film. Brian did a good job. He's a good director. We looked at it, and as a producer, I just thought it would work better this way for now.
Mel, I think, is caught in the middle of all this, you know, and gave me the opportunity to go ahead and rework the film and try to get it to be something more that Paramount and Warner's wanted, which I said no to. And to me, it wasn't out of stubbornness. It was just literally like, I only know how to do the version I'm doing. I don't know how to do any other version. In my head, I've always gone for a specific audience and a specific kind of movie, and it's in the script. You know, if you read the script, it's all in there. I couldn't creatively come up with anything other than to just hunker down and defend what I had done.
Kill me. Please, allow me.
Brian's an uncompromising kind of guy, so he says, nope, this is what I did, this is what... And, but we just decided to write a third act and submitted it to him. What do you think of that? He says, no. And I said, well, would you direct it? No. I'm like, well, okay.
And at the end of the day, he was left in a very awkward position. And I think even once I was gone, he still tried to make the movie that still was Payback, but that still was more friendly to an audience.
Brian had done a few rewrites for him, but it wasn't appeasing the sort of powers to be. And I think it was kind of a joint effort that they part ways.
I remember being so worried, like, what would Dick think? I'm throwing off my movie, and that would never happen to him. But he was, he was really nice about it and very kind of like, that's, what can you do? So you did what you did, and you took whatever stand you took, and you just, if you can live with that, that's fine. You don't have to worry about that.
We shot for an extra 10 days and created an entirely different third act, even with different characters in it. I mean, Chris Christopherson wasn't even in that film.
But if there's even a bruise on him, I'll make this last 3 weeks. I'll give you a blood transfusion to keep you alive if I have to.
There's a kind of a prologue So you know kind of where this guy came from, at least. You know, he's kind of in a backyard abortionist doctor's place having bullets removed from his back. And you set up the mission.
Not many men know what their life's worth. I do.
70 grand.
70 grand.
And it was taken from me, and I'm gonna get it back. And it's like he opens his eyes. You thought he was dead, but he opens his eyes. Nothing kills this guy. He's got this single purpose. And I wanted to, without sort of like getting mushy, I wanted the audience to at least be able to travel with this guy a bit more.
They say time heals all wounds. And you'd think after 5 months of lying on my back, I would have given up any idea of getting even.
I actually thought that the voiceover helped you enter that world a bit more.
Crooked cops. Did they come any other way?
If I'd been just a bit dumber, I could have joined the force myself. And it was that kind of, it was dry, but it was tongue-in-cheek. There was like a slight amount of wit attached to it. And you didn't need that. In some ways, engaging the audience more was not really the style of the late 60s, early 70s film, but we were releasing it in the 90s. So, you know, one cuts the cloth to suit the audience. You don't make the work for an elite.
Oh my God, what happened to you?
I got hammered.
Okay.
Yeah.
We put it on the film. The test scores went up. The studio liked it better. I liked it better. And that was the reason for all of that.
Kevin's the one common factor of all versions of Payback is Kevin. He's been on every version of it. When I was there, when I wasn't there, and so he's, weirdly enough, he's been on it as long as I have worked on it. He's worked on it longer.
Well, yeah, I have. Over the course of about 7 years, I've done about 3 versions of this. Payback has become an old friend. When it came time the decision was made to redo a director's cut, we dug back into the editorial inventory, and at the time we did not back up media. All we had were the daily Avid tapes. We were going to reconstruct the project on an Avid and cut it. The tapes had disappeared. Nobody knew what happened to them. They'd ended. It was really sort of an archaeological hunt. We traced them back to the trailer department. They had them for a while, then they were sent back to one of the other studios, and the trail went cold. So it sort of looked like the whole project was in jeopardy, and we'd printed film on the show, and I said, well, you know what? We can do it on film. Been doing it for 100 years, we can do it now. So we got a couple of our good old flatbeds here, and rebuilt the cutting room with film trims, and that's how we did it. The first couple of weeks was pretty frustrating because you have to get into your mind that things are going to take longer. Something that takes a second on an Avid is probably going to take 10 to 15 minutes on film. Creatively, you just have to go with that.
It was just basically the two of us on a flatbed trying to put it back together again and having huge amounts of time to think about everything.
It was sort of Brian's chance to finally, I think, sort of sit down and for us both to kind of work on the tonality of the movie. And we definitely had the time. There was no sort of release date for this.
Strangely enough, things that I wouldn't have cut out of my cut that I was working on originally, I now felt I didn't need, or things I had cut out, I thought I gotta put that line back in, or trim. I think generally it was trimming stuff on this version. Probably is a few minutes even shorter than the version I was trying to get on screen back then.
During the shooting, I think there was a lot more kind of wacky humor injected into it that I think even at the time, I think Brian was going for and was sort of liking it. And I think our main work on the dealing with the tonality of it is sort of pulling that back, just trying to take a little more serious tone to the movie.
All this time you don't even pretend to ask how I've been.
You need any cash or anything?
Get yourself killed, prick. I ought to tell him you're coming.
One of the early scenes in Brian's movie that I think caused a lot of friction with the studio was when Porter comes back and meets the Deborah Unger character. He meets her, confronts her, and then takes her into the bedroom in the theatrical version. But there was a scene that was shot where he confronts her and really sort of, Porter loses it and beats the hell out of her. And that's back in.
I remember Ed Lamato coming out to visit the set one afternoon at lunch, and he asked me how it was going, and I was really excited, and I said, I was so much fun the other day. Mel got to beat the shit out of me, and he said, it'll never be in the movie. I was mortified. I'm thinking to myself, is it 7 minutes? Did I screw up? I think it's okay. And he was right, because there was not a palette for Mel in the way that there is a palette for him now. Audiences didn't want to see Mel beat up a woman.
Personally, I would have left that scene in, but it was the studio actually thought, well, you know, it's a little hard on women. You know, it sort of gives a bad message on violence to women, which, you know, hey, nobody's advocating violence to women here. We're talking about these characters and their sort of dilemma.
I deserve the beating. And no one deserves a beating. I'll be politically correct. But please, she deserved the beating.
What I like about those old movies and what I tried to do in this movie was that the less you know about everyone, but the more you feel about them, the better. What I was going for is there's something very kind of, oh my God, you know, what is this? And we don't learn till later why he's doing what he's doing. I mean, we catch up pretty quick. We learn that there was a double cross. She shot him in the back and tried to kill him. And once you know that, then you're like, oh, now I understand why he's doing what he's doing. The idea is that you push this guy away, you see him, you don't know what he's about, and then you further push him away as far as being a character the audience can get into, and then you bring the audience back, and you give him this and you give him that, and slowly you're starting to feel for this guy and getting behind him more than feel for him, but you're starting to realize that in this world that we're being introduced to, he is the guy with the code.
And you kind of get the reason that he's beaten her is because he doesn't understand why she did what she did to him, and that he still has these feelings for her, you know, like if he didn't care about her, he wouldn't even visit her. And Deborah was like, boy, she was amazing. She was flying up against doors, and I'm saying, hey, take it easy, you know. She was just taking the full dives, you know. She's very athletic.
I wasn't afraid of oven doors, and hopefully Mel wasn't afraid of the knife or the iron. I didn't hurt him at all. He was unscathed. But I cracked my ribs on the last take of the day. It was my own darn fault, too. It was getting too easy. It was becoming too much fun, and nothing was hurting because it was all technically done as it should be. I just thought I would throw myself a little harder towards the oven just to see if I would get a little angrier. And that didn't work out well.
Another scene that's been dropped in that comes after that is Mel's confrontation in the meat truck. That was another big scene of contention where Mel basically kills one of these guys in cold blood because he insults Rosie. And that's back in.
You know, I think I fucked you once.
I'm going for a specific audience. If someone said, oh, he makes genre movies, I'd be like, you know, you're damn right I do. That's what I love.
What do you think the odds are on Twice?
So I guess, in a sense, I've limited maybe the audience for the movie.
I don't think your odds are good. You got anything to say?
No, thank you.
Then just stay here.
Weirdly, having all this time go by gave me a much more perspective on what footage I had and what was the right way to end this film, which I end ironically and with a bit of you don't quite know what's happened at the end of the movie, which I think is very in keeping with those 70s films.
Be on the mark.
It's a new third act, and it's basically from his, after Stegman gets machine gunned and the confrontation with Porter and Pearl. From that point on, it's all new material, not seen in the theatrical version, but what was originally shot.
I think the times that you live in allow you to make the movies that come out. And in the 70s and late 60s, we were in the middle of the Vietnam War, and cynicism and ambiguity was everywhere because people were cynical about the war, they were ambiguous about it, is it right, is it wrong? And the movies, I think, reflect that, in my opinion, and people accept it. And in a weird sort of way, I'm wrong for wanting to have my ambiguous 70s ending. I should have made it when I was 15 years old in high school then, in 1976, or 75. I make it in junior high school. So I'm not necessarily right as far as a studio point of view in wanting to do that. And they're not wrong in that they want a more accessible product.
No, it's not there. I took your gun. It's back here.
The movie as it exists theatrically and for years on DVD has a particular look. Given this chance to give a new look to the movie, the audience has seen it blue, so now let's show it to them without the blue.
Our lab was deluxe, and we did the CCE process, which is their full bleach bypass. We did that in the print, not the negative, so the negative is still fine. You can go back to that original negative and transfer it, and there's no bleach bypass process to it, so that negative looks absolutely fine, and there's a lot of interpretation that can be done to it.
We originally cut digitally and timed analog, if you will, in the soup with the chemicals going by, which is a great experience, which is going to be gone, I think, very shortly. And then in this version, went back to cutting. I had never cut on film. It's the only time I ever cut on film. And then going digitally with the timing.
Once we got into that and started seeing it's a pretty rich, good-looking negative. I had never seen it that way, because Daly's was bleach bypass. And I just never had seen it they do the scans at sort of a neutral level. And you could kind of see what's in there, and it was quite remarkable.
What we tried to do is still concentrate on the bleach bypass elements as far as colors being knocked down. Skin tones are still down, but haven't gotten blue. But we played more with because we now are working electronically also and digitally rather than just being in the film lab. So we could add more contrast, kind of give everyone a more haunted, worn out look. The lines in their faces kind of pop a little bit more.
So Brian decided that the look of the movie was going to be that the exteriors, which were mainly shot in Chicago, he was trying to go for the sort of gritty French Connection kind of look. That's where the bleach bypass look is being used in the DI, but with a little bit more color separation, basically adding more contrast. But once he got into all of his interior scenes, mainly where the outfit lives, that negative was sort of rich and sort of lush, that he decided, well, we'll contrast it, that the exterior street world is where Porter lives, and that these mobsters, the outfit, they live in these sort of palatial sort of environment that they've sort of created to sort of legitimize themselves. And then there's scenes where Rosie's apartment, it was actually lit very warm anyway. And so Brian sort of went with that as sort of, this is going to be like a place of sanctuary for Porter. So it's sort of a warm, kind of cozy place for him. Originally, we were going to try to make as much of the original score work for this. And once Brian and I got into it, it became apparent that the original score, the tonality of the movie had changed so much.
And I didn't want to have to try to kind of force it in and jam it in and cut this out and try to make it work.
Nobody was quite prepared to bring in a new composer, have a composer rescore the whole movie. It wasn't in the budget. And Brian and I had worked with a music editor, Scott Stambler, who did a lot of the temp scores for us on movies.
Even on this, Scott originally came in as a music editor to try to take the old score and recut it and make it work. And what he started to do was write kind of little bridges himself to get things to work together. And one day it just, I was sitting there listening to cues and I thought, well, can you write some more of this?
I had a 5-minute main title to write, and I've never written a main title before. And it's a huge blank page. Just terrified. I'm terrified. For weeks on end, I'm not thinking. I started writing speculative pieces to play for him, just different sounds. Because he said, I like this 70s sound. And I'm thinking, I don't know what a 70s sound is. I spent a lot of time in the 70s, not necessarily coherent time, but I was there. And I became a little, I don't know what the word, I got frustrated, but I kept coming up with different cues. And at one point, I think he sensed my frustration. He was liking what I played, but I could tell nothing was working for him. And he said, well, why don't you stop writing 70s cues and just write for the characters in the movie. And that's when everything started to click. This film required a lot of dark thinking, and that's where I went. How I came up with this cue was, I think I had a nightmare about my kids, which seems regular. My little girls, it's, I don't know, the father thing. You just wake up and have some horrible dream and you feel horrible the entire day. And when I was writing, I wasn't sleeping much at all. I'd get up at 3, 4 in the morning with something. And Mel gets into the shower, and I go to this minor. And so forth, but in the middle of the night, it really sort of moved me, and they're very simple chords that I think sometimes sound fantastic, simple and elegant.
34, 135.
Okay.
I like that. So A flat and G natural. I think that's what.
I don't know what my emotional reaction is going to be.
This will be your first time?
My first score. I'm hoping to have a nice cry, when I hear these horn players play these notes. And then I'm done.
So guys, tell me what you're doing here today.
Well,
You tell them.
we're recording a new score for this opus. Epic?
Epic.
Epic opus.
Yeah.
Any movie has two writers, and that's the screenwriter and the composer. The two people who really write original material for a film.
Having been a music editor for so many years, I've worked on a lot of films. Never have I been told by the director that this is your movie too. And Brian told me that in an email, and that to me was the biggest moment in my writing career. And I can live with that for forever.
I think it's so wonderful that we're going to see Brian's cut, because it always amazed me that this extraordinary director and writer wasn't able to feel that sense of release. He's been held by this ghost of an experience. Did he have it? Did he not have it? Did he do it? Did he not do it? For 8 years now.
148 Apple, take 2.
B-Mark. B-Mark.
Jesus Christ.
You know what? I'm really glad that this is being released because it's valid.
Come with me.
And it's a good film. And it does really reflect that kind of sociopathic Porter.
Come on! Come on! Porter! God! Fuck! Fuck! Fuck!
And it's just interesting. It's like a whole other ending. Like, it's like watching they're different films.
You're not dead.
And it's interesting to juxtapose them and watch them.
You know, it was a great lesson for me to see how basically kind of a lot of it, the same material, could be made into 2 different movies. People will be able to see how sort of different it is, and the subtleties and the performances in between.
I gotta get you to a hospital.
No hospitals. I know a guy.
Is he a doctor?
No. No.
Tell me where to go.
Just drive, baby.
Mel, I think, there's things in your life that you'll always remember, like sound bites. You know, someone saying something to you, someone yelling at you when you're, some teacher yelling at you in school that you always, that everyone else forgot, but it's in your head for the rest of your life. And good things and bad things and romantic things and, but one thing I'll always have in my head as long as I live is him saying to me, can you be ready to shoot in 12 weeks? And hearing myself say yes, and that is a beautiful thing. I can always be ready to shoot in 12 weeks.